Hello and welcome to Richland Spotlight, an ongoing program where we talk with city staff and community leaders and shine a light on programs, projects, and events happening here in Richland. And joining us today for the show is Vice Chair of the Parks and Recreation Commission, Nancy Doran. Welcome, Nancy.
Thank you.
Glad to have you on the show. So what we brought you on for is to talk about walkability. Now, when you think of Richland's parks, you think of Howard Amen Park, some of the other community and neighborhood parks, but then you also have a vast trail network that the city has. So how and what does it mean for the community to be walkable?
Well, actually, walkability has a number of different meanings. And if you were to talk with an urban planner about walkability, they would really be talking about the built infrastructure of your city, rather than the parks and recreation. So they would look at, do you have sidewalks? What are their streets like? And if you use those metrics, Richland doesn't come off very well. Too many parts of our city do not have sidewalks. The streets that we walk along, the sidewalks are small and the traffic is zooming past. There's no barrier between us and the traffic. And I'm often walking past parking lots. The ideal city for a walkable city would probably look something like the Parkway, which is a lovely eighth of a mile perhaps, where the street has parking between the wide sidewalks and the traffic, which slows down. The stores are right there in front of us. But most of the city doesn't look like that. So that's one aspect of walkability. And we've got a long ways to go on that. But our trail system is fabulous. And what it is most people in the city are not that far from a place where they can go walking. And unfortunately, they often have to drive to get there, but they can use those trails. As you mentioned, we have Howard Amen and the River Trail, which will connect all the way through the three Tri-Cities, and the Sacagawea Trail. We've got the bypass trail has been improved and is a lovely place to walk, especially in the summer. It's got great shade, and that doesn't get used as much as I think it ought to. We've got the Keene Road Trail, and then we've got the Urban Greenbelt Trail, as well as just places to walk within the parks, and Badger Mountain on our doorstep. So we have a lot of places to go walking.
So the idea of all these trails is to basically take interconnection and have everybody connect so you could basically walk from one point of the city to the other?
Well, that would be lovely. And we don't really have that. And there's lots of difficulties in crossing some streets, difficult in the afternoon if you were on the west side of George Washington trying to get to the River Trail by walking. You'd better be at a street with a light, because Snyder would not be a good street. You wouldn't be able to get across very easily. But we do have trails that people can get to fairly readily. And certainly things like the River Trail are extremely well used. And in South Richland, the Keene Road Trail is very well used.
Well, so that brings us to the question for Parks and Recreation Commission, which is, what is the commission doing to try to create this more walkable community?
Well, when we first started looking at walkability and started doing research, what we realized is that a lot of the walkability areas are infrastructure. We met with city staff and learned that they're very aware of these issues and trying to incorporate, as new development goes on, trying to incorporate complete streets, walkability, bicycling into what they build, but our older infrastructure doesn't let us. So at Parks and Rec, what we decided is that what we can do is programming, and to look at ways of making it more interesting and more accessible for people to come walking. And so both city staff has developed projects, and Parks and Recreation Commission and volunteers have developed walks. So most months you're going to find some kind of walk scheduled that you can join. Sometimes they ask you to call ahead of time. But we've got the Urban Greenbelt Trail walk in particular, which is one that I lead with a couple of the other commissioners. And that walk wanders through the central part of the city. And the first time I was going to lead a walk on that, I thought, I don't know what I'm going to say to people for 3 miles. And so I started looking closely at where the walk goes and realized it covers a lot of places that I could find pictures of what Richland looked like in the 40s or 50s or earlier. So we've turned that walk into a history walk, and we stop at a lot of places along the walk and look at photos of old Richland. And it's especially fun when people who grew up here come along, because they tell so much more. Their stories really enrich the walk. city staff have developed a wonderful series of walks, especially last summer. There were sunrise walks. And sunrise comes very early in the Tri-Cities in the summer, but I went on one on the river and one down in Claybell, and the park rangers generally lead these, or some other staff. And they've been on, there's one coming up on Bateman in February. These are terrific ways of finding out about parks that perhaps people don't know about. The city activity guide that the Parks and Recreation Department puts out also lists the bird walks that the Audubon Society does every month. So there really are, we're really looking at those ways of getting people into different parks, doing some walking, and once they're there and see how beautiful it is and how enjoyable it is, they're not going to need us leading the walk. They're going to be taking their friends there on their own and making it part of their lives.
And I remember some of the diversities. For instance, I went out when you were doing the Mid-Century Homes Walk, which was really neat too.
That one absolutely knocked our socks off. We had, I was working with Teresa Knirk, who'd previously been a counselor at Hanford High, and we both loved those homes in the area, and we weren't sure what interest there would be in the first time we did that walk. So when I left the house, my husband looked at me and said, "How many people have to show up to make you happy for all the work you and Teresa have done?" I thought, 5, I'd be thrilled. We had between 75 and 80 people show up. So it shows that there really is an interest. And you know, right now we're looking at what are the kinds of walks can we develop. People really like doing history walks. They like doing themed walks. You know, if people have suggestions for walks, I hope they contact us, because we'd love to develop them. And if there are people who want to help us with that, you know, and have ideas, that would be terrific also.
And you know, you talk about interest. 2 years ago, the Parks and Rec and city staff held a community meeting to discuss, you know, with citizens, get input on, you know, how to make Richland more walkable. Out of that, you said these programs and things came out. But talk about some of the other milestones or other things that happened as a result of this meeting and where we go from there.
Well, one of the things that was really interesting, about 70 people showed up, and comments were almost, I think maybe almost evenly divided between walking and bicycling. And a city that's walkable is also bicycle friendly, and vice versa. And there were a lot of comments dealing with infrastructure things out of the range of Parks and Rec, but we made sure that all the departments got them. People had concerns about particular intersections, particular places. And two things in particular I'm really excited about. That one of the things, we had a lot of comments from people out in the Horn Rapids development that they can't walk or bicycle into town safely. And last year, city staff was able to get funding, and we're going to be able to see a path coming. I don't think they've got funding for it all the way in, but they got it for a good deal of the way. It's a start. So having that funded and scheduled for construction will be wonderful. Another place that people really were concerned about was the intersection coming off Queens Gate when you have to cross I-82. So people who might live in Cherrywood and who use the Keene Trail, they'd love to go for lunch at all those restaurants over by the Queens Gate shopping area, but they don't want to take their lives in their hands to cross it. And we're going to have a new there's going to be construction in that area, which will include walkable crosswalks and places for people to get across safely through that area. Those are enormous. That kind of connection, infrastructure connection, really is going to make a huge difference for people's ability to do that safely. And you know, the more you see people out there, the more you'll see others joining them. Oh, I can do this. And we'll see more people out there. And then there'll be more demand for other changes in the city to make other places more walkable.
Well, you know, it takes time with the city government for, you know, to get any of these things going. You have to go after funding, you have to do this, you have to do that. But where do you see Richland in the future?
You know, I think that if we could keep up this momentum, I think that some of these things will continue to happen. Some of the things are going to be tough. George Washington, our main street, is the world's least walkable street. And there are parts of it that are just horrible. But it's also, if we turned it into a street that made it very happy for walkers, we would have a lot of very angry
disgruntled drivers.
Absolutely. And so finding that balance, deciding, have you built a city for commuters or for walkers, or what does it do for the citizens? Those are important conversations that we'll be having, I think, as time goes on. I think we saw a lot of those concerns, some of those concerns come out last year when we were talking about the changes that need to be made up by the Winco area. And it will be interesting if that public market gets built, that will have, that will connect to the rest of the Parkway area and to that. So what kind of changes will that call for? I think we'll see, as some of these things happen, that there will be a demand for more walkable areas, and that's going to have to be incorporated into it. I think really ultimately, it's up to citizens to let their voices be heard on what they think is important, and then city staff has to sort of figure out the way to make everybody happy and how to do it. And for people to see that there are advantages to putting some of these walkability things. People might stop and eat in Richland restaurants before going all the way home. If they, there's things that can happen that can have economic benefits. And cities that have pushed towards walkability issues have found those to be true.
Oh, it goes all the way around. It's quality of life. It's
Absolutely,
benefit,
absolutely.
It's infrastructure, it's amenities, it's all the stuff.
That's right. And it all takes a lot of money, and it doesn't happen overnight. And because those are the reasons why we really ended up looking so much at what can we do as individuals to encourage walking. But at the same time, we have to keep our eyes out on what's happening elsewhere in the city and sort of always keep those walkability issues up front.
Very good. That's a good place to end right there. So if you have any questions about what we talked about or anything going on with the city, go ahead and link it right there at the bottom of your screen. And I'd like to thank Nancy Dorn for joining me
for having me
on Richland Spotlight, and we'll see you next time. I'm Mike Charbonneau.